war and the fanfare of kings. Tonight, we journey not to an empire's dazzling peak, but into the deep, quiet shadow of history. A place where the calendar doesn't matter, and the only sound is the wind brushing against the forgotten stones of a people who called themselves the Elam. They left no great battles, no golden treasuries, only a complex silence and evidence of a terrifyingly advanced, yet profoundly simple, existence. If you seek the high-energy thrill of modern history, you are in the wrong place. If you seek a calm, data-rich immersion into the unique mystery of humanity's true, ancient foundation, settle in. This is the history so deep, it becomes a lullaby. For those seeking the quiet immersion into the very texture of forgotten time, settle in. Let the low hum of distant history be your guide. We are not focusing on the famous, the flashy, or the easily explained. We are turning our attention to the cold, undeniable, and deeply troubling evidence of a people known only by their structural signature. The Elam, the official chronology of human development, is a neat, comforting narrative. The Paleolithic hunter-gatherers, the Neolithic Revolution with its farming and pottery, the rise of the Bronze Age, and then the familiar march toward today. It is a story of predictable, incremental progress. The Elam, however, are a wrinkle in the fabric of this history, a geological anomaly tucked so far into the past that they make the Great Pyramids seem like recent additions to the landscape. Their existence, proven not by scrolls or gold, but by their architecture, challenges the very definition of a primitive mind. Our investigation begins not on the surface, but hundreds of feet below it, in the quiet, geologically stable highlands of what is now the Carpathian region. The initial discovery was purely accidental, a deep seismic survey conducted for mineral exploration that registered a perfectly square, highly structured void beneath a vast, untouched plain. Geological surveys often detect anomalies, but a void with a measurable, rectilinear geometry at a depth correlated to a timeframe exceeding 40,000 years ago is not an anomaly. It is an archaeological THUNDERCLA. The subterranean labyrinth, geometry in the glacial shadow, the site, designated G47 Alpha, presented a profound problem from the moment the first exploratory shaft was sunk. The expected findings for a structure dating to the Middle Paleolithic would have been rudimentary windbreaks, bone fragments, and a scatter of chipped stone tools. What the drill core samples revealed instead was a hardened, polished surface of igneous rock, cut and fitted with a precision that demanded tools far beyond the capacity of the known Ice Age inhabitants. Dr. Alara Vance, the lead geoarchaeologist, spent 2 years simply clearing the access tunnels, which had been intentionally sealed and subsequently backfilled by eons of glacial silt and rock fall. What she uncovered was not a cave dwelling adapted by early man, but a fully engineered, subterranean complex. The Elam, it seemed, were a people who chose the depths not for secrecy, but for stability. The complex consisted of a network of interconnected chambers, ramps and shafts, all carved into the bedrock. The most striking feature was the consistency of the angles. Every corner, every wall-to-floor transition was a perfect 90-degree angle. This is significant. For the Paleolithic mind, utility and efficiency dictated structure. A perfect right angle requires not just effort, but a conceptual understanding of applied geometry, a concept traditionally attributed to far later Mesopotamian and Egyptian cultures. The tool marks, visible under high magnification, suggest a process of abrasion and polishing, potentially using ultra-hard mineral slurry like garnet or corundum powder, coupled with rhythmic leveraged pressure. The sheer scope of this rock removal, without evidence of copper, bronze, or iron, pushes the limits of our understanding of Stone Age capability. The cold welding phenomenon, stone fused to stone. Greatest architectural paradox of the Elam civilization lies in their construction technique. which Dr. Vance's team termed lithic cohesion, or more dramatically, cold welding. In typical megalithic construction, think of later structures. Like Stonehenge or the pyramids, massive stones are cut, moved, and placed in proximity, relying on gravity and precise fitting for stability. The Elam did something else entirely. Where two massive, several-ton blocks of hard metamorphic rock met in the structural walls, they were not simply touching. They were fused. Chemical analysis of the joint line or seam reveals a narrow, microcrystalline zone, a transitional layer approximately 0.5 to 1.5 millimeters thick, where the molecular structure of the two separate rock blocks appears to have been slightly reordered and interlocked. This is not a mortar. There is no chemical binder. It is not natural cementation. It suggests a localized application of immense pressure and possibly a focused, non-thermal kinetic energy that, when combined with a mineral agent, allowed the rock faces to bond. Geologically, this is almost impossible without the massive heat and pressure that occurs naturally deep within the Earth's crust, metamorphism, or advanced modern technology like frictional welding. Yet, the Elam, armed only with what we assume were stone tools, achieved this on a structural scale. The walls of G47 Alpha are, in effect, a geological monoculture, single, indivisible sheets of rock spanning tens of meters, offering unparalleled structural integrity, capable of withstanding the immense load of the overlying Earth for millennia. This cold welding is the key to understanding the Elam's environmental resilience. Their structures are not merely shelters. They are engineered, climate-sealed habitats. The fusion seals out groundwater, prevents rock spalling from freeze-thaw cycles, and creates a perfectly hermetic environment. This stability is why the site remains so miraculously preserved. But it simultaneously explains why no organic material survived. The Elam created a clean, oxygen-starved, geochemically neutral tomb for their own history. The chronological nightmare, pushing the limits of radiometric dating, the most contentious and frankly sleep-depriving aspect of the Elam discovery, is the dating. If we were to date the site based purely on architectural sophistication, G47 Alpha would comfortably sit alongside Roman construction, or, at the very least, early Neolithic settlement, perhaps 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. But the geological and, crucially, the radiometric evidence screams a far older story. Standard carbon-14 dating is useless for inorganic rock structures and unreliable beyond the 50,000-year mark. To date the Elam site, Dr. Vance's team had to rely on more robust, though often debated, methods: uranium-thorium dating of secondary calcite flowstones deposited after the construction, and potassium-argon dating of the surrounding volcanic tuff layers, which bracket the structure. The results, confirmed by 3 separate, independent laboratories, place the earliest phase of the Elam construction at an astounding $42,000 PM, 3,500 years before present BP. This places the Elam not just in the Paleolithic, but specifically during the period of the Aurignacian culture, a time when Homo sapiens in Europe were supposedly characterized by rudimentary art, bone tools, and simple shelters, not monumental, fused stone subterranean complexes. The academic fallout has been predictable and intense. Critics have invoked the old wood problem, where older, preserved material contaminates a younger sample, or argued for geochemical contamination, the gain or loss of parent-daughter isotopes due to groundwater leaching. However, the potassium-argon dates from the sealed rock strata surrounding and physically cut by the Elam construction are unyielding. The walls are demonstrably younger than the 45,000-year-old rock they cut into, and demonstrably older than the 38,000-year-old Volcanic ash layer that sealed an upper access. Shaft. The inescapable conclusion. One that forces a major revision of human history. Is this a technologically unique and architecturally advanced culture? Existed in the deep shadows of the Paleolithic age. They were contemporary with the earliest cave painters and the last Neanderthals. Yet they were living in an environment that their peers could never have conceived of building. The Elam were not simply surviving. They were engineering permanence. The internal grid. Precision and planning beyond the fusion technology. The internal planning of the Elam complex hints at a society with a deep understanding of spatial relationships, resource management, and perhaps civil engineering. The main chamber, nearly 200 feet long, is not a haphazard cavern. It is a meticulously vaulted, dome-like space with a perfectly level floor. The floor is made of an unknown composite material, a mix of crushed, inert stone dust and a naturally occurring resinous binder, pressed and heated to create a ceramic-like hardness. This tiled surface served several functions. It was easy to clean, provided insulation, and most importantly, was acoustically dead. This is a critical detail, hinting at the Elam's primary mode of interaction, which we will explore later. Running throughout the walls and floor, Dr. Vance's team identified narrow sealed channels. These conduits were too smooth and too small for human passage. Initial speculation suggested water drainage, but the channels run against gravity in several locations. Instead, the current leading theory, supported by trace mineral analysis along the channel walls, is that they formed a complex ventilation and temperature regulation system. The Elam were Harns. Sim geothermal stability, drawing air from deep bedrock fissures, circulating it through the labyrinth, and using the thermal mass of the stone structure to maintain a constant, optimal temperature of approximately $12 circ. Text $2. A circ. Text $, $54 circ. Text $2. Y circ. Text $, regardless of the bitter glacial conditions raging above. This is not instinct. This is passive climate control achieved 42,000 years ago. Furthermore, in several side chambers, the structural integrity of the cold welded seams suggests they were designed to withstand periodic, massive pressure changes. Did the Elam anticipate natural geological shifts? Or, more intriguing, were certain chambers sealed and pressurized as part of a technological or storage process? The mystery deepens with the silence, the unanswered question of labor and society. The final, silent implication of the impossible cradle is the social structure required to build it. To carve, transport, fit, and cold weld multiple massive stone blocks, and to maintain the geometrical precision necessary for the integrated ventilation system, would have required a massive, coordinated labor force operating over generations, a centralized authority capable of planning and directing this long-term project, a sophisticated knowledge transmission system to pass complex engineering techniques from one generation of builders to the next without a formal written language, since no evidence of script exists. Elam civilization was not just a group of people living in a hole in the ground. It was a complex society with a division of labor, a system of management, and a long-term goal. They traded the transient, easily moved structures of their contemporaries for the immense investment of an enduring, hidden metropolis. Why? What threat were they protecting themselves from? The glacial cold? Or something else, something only the deep-sealed silence of the rock could truly defend against? As we settle into the profound weight of this ancient mystery, let the thought of this colossal, invisible effort, a civilization that built its entire world in reverse, carving order out of chaos deep beneath the ice, allow your mind to drift. The Elam are not a loud history, but their silence speaks volumes. a paradox of engineering and time that remains to this day unsolved. The cold, permanent stone is their only silent narrator. Let the low pressure of their enduring architecture gently pull your thoughts towards rest. Welcome back to the deep quiet. If the crushing weight of the Elam's subterranean architecture, their impossible cradle, did not quite settle your mind, perhaps the cold, abstract precision of their non-verbal science will. Part 1 immersed us in the fact of their existence, a technologically unique, cold-welded civilization operating in the geological shadows of the Paleolithic Age. Now, we turn our attention from how they built their world to what they knew, focusing on the extraordinary paradox of a people who mastered complex natural laws without leaving a single written word. This is the history of knowledge conveyed through light, sound, and the tireless memory of the pattern keepers. It is a narrative that requires patience, as the data points are subtle, often nearly indistinguishable from natural phenomena, demanding close, meticulous analysis. The celestial calendar, passive astronomy in the depths for a culture that lived primarily underground. The Elam had an astonishing, almost obsessive, grasp of the celestial mechanics occurring high above their heads. This knowledge was integrated not through observation from the surface, but through a series of carefully engineered shafts and pinholes, connecting the subterranean chambers to the sky. The main astronomical observation point is located in the largest chamber of complex G47 Alpha, which we previously described as the vaulted central space. Dr. Vance's team initially dismissed the small, narrow vertical shafts piercing the thick bedrock ceiling as simple ventilation ducts. However, extensive laser mapping and digital reconstruction revealed a precise, non-random distribution. These shafts ranging in internal diameter from $5 text cm dollar to $15 text centimeter dollar were not bored straight up. They followed complex compound angles calculated to compensate for the terrestrial tilt and the precession of the equinoxes. They were, in effect, ancient, fixed-position telescopes. The solstitial and equinoctial alignment, most undeniable evidence of their astronomical acumen, came during the summer and winter solstices. On the morning of the winter solstice, a single razor-thin beam of sunlight, attenuated by the immense depth of the shaft, penetrates the main chamber. It does not fall randomly. It strikes a specific point on the chamber floor, a small polished disc of black basalt embedded in the composite tile. This alignment is perfect, demanding not just observation, but a pre-calculation of the sun's extreme southern declination. Crucially, the beam lasts for exactly 14 minutes and 32 seconds before the Earth's rotation shifts it off the target. In the summer, the effect is repeated at the summer solstice, the light beam striking the corresponding basalt disk at the northern end of the chamber. These events mark the annual turning points, providing the Elam with an absolute chronological reference. Furthermore, 3 shafts were found aligned to track the equinoxes, illuminating a series of small linear depressions carved into the chamber wall. The precision required to maintain these alignments over millennia, factoring in minute geological shifts and the need to carve a shaft through up to 80 meters of dense rock, speaks to an engineering feat tied directly to abstract science, the lunar and stellar. Tracking perhaps even more impressive are the secondary shafts. Analysis showed that a cluster of 3 shafts aligns to track the 18.5-year cycle of the maximum lunar standstill. The light is dimmer, often requiring the use of highly reflective internal linings. Trace elements of polished mica were found to amplify the image onto the floor. This suggests the Elam were tracking the moon's orbit, a task far more complex than tracking the predictable path of the sun. Why track the moon so meticulously? Perhaps for a system of tide-related prediction, though their settlement was inland, or, more likely, for the calibration of complex temporal cycles beyond the simple year. Additionally, one shaft cluster was found to align perfectly with the rising point of the star Vega during the estimated period of the construction's maximum use, around 40,000 BP. Given that Vega is the historical pole star candidate due to the Earth's axial precession, this alignment strongly suggests the Elam were aware of the long-term shift in the Earth's axis, a concept that would not be scientifically formalized until the Hellenistic period. Over 35,000 years later, the Elam's astronomy was not about mystic worship. It was about precise, fixed-point calculation. It provided a permanent, unchanging clock for a society dedicated to long-term planning, ensuring the accurate timing of seasonal harvests if they had them, or, more likely, a crucial social cycle, the master of silence, Elam acoustics and resonance. If the Elam's architecture was designed for stability and their astronomy for timekeeping, their understanding of sound was the language of their culture. Living in the silent, dense rock, they became masters of controlling and manipulating acoustics. As mentioned in the previous section, the central chamber floor was engineered to be acoustically dead, minimizing echo and reverberation. This is a deliberate choice, implying that when sound was generated, it was meant to be controlled, specific, and directional. The resonance chambers in the periphery of the main complex. Dr. Vance's team identified 5 smaller, sealed chambers that defied immediate explanation. They contained no tools, no artifacts, and no obvious purpose. But their shape was peculiar. Each was ellipsoidal, with precisely calculated curved walls. Acoustic testing, using non-invasive, low-frequency signal generators, yielded astonishing results. While the main chamber absorbed sound, these smaller chambers amplified and focused it. When a signal was introduced at one specific focal point within the chamber, the sound waves converged almost perfectly on a second, corresponding focal point across the room. The sound intensity at the second point was measured to be up to 40 times greater than the sound introduced at the source. This is the principle of a modern whispering gallery or an acoustic lens. Achieved using perfectly smooth, curved stone walls, the Elam had built 5 separate, functioning acoustic amplifiers and communication relays. Sound-based data transmission. The question is, how did they use this? Researchers theorize that the Elam used sound not for music or loud speech, but for the transmission and amplification of specific, low-frequency tonal patterns, complex sequences of clicks, hums, and modulated tones. If a pattern keeper, whom we will discuss shortly, introduced a complex, tonal sequence at the focal point of chamber 1, the sound could be precisely beamed to the focal point of chamber 2, possibly through connecting air shafts, and then perfectly amplified for reception. This system would be robust against background noise, which was non-existent underground, and could transmit complex, nonverbal data packets across vast distances within the subterranean complex. The Elam's telecommunications system was built from stone and silence. A final, mysterious feature related to acoustics is the discovery of microgrooves cut into the ceiling of several corridors. When air is forced through these grooves, perhaps by a draft from the ventilation system or human effort, the corridor generates a sustained, ultra-low frequency infrasound hum, below the threshold of human hearing. The current theory suggests this infrasound was used either to disorient potential unwanted intruders, a sonic defense, maintain the physical and mental state of the Elam themselves, perhaps inducing the meditative or highly focused state necessary for the memory work of the pattern-keepers. The pattern keepers, the living library. The greatest mystery of the Elam is how they managed to maintain their advanced technological and astronomical knowledge without a single piece of papyrus, clay tablet, or stone script. The answer lies in their social structure. The pattern keepers. The concept is known as mnemotechnics, the art of memory, but the Elam elevated it to the level of a societal foundation. The pattern keepers were not just individuals with good memories. They were a specialized, possibly hereditary caste responsible for the literal preservation of the entire civilization's knowledge. Based on the system of loci, memory palace, based on anthropological models of other non-literate societies. The Alum likely utilized a sophisticated method of loci, memory palace. The subterranean complex itself was their physical memory aid. Every architectural feature, every geometric angle, every mineral vein in the wall, every alignment point, and every echo chamber was a mnemonic trigger. A pattern keeper could walk through a specific route and read the history, the engineering formulae, or the astronomical data based on the room they were in, the acoustic tone they generated, or the light beam that hit the floor at that moment. For instance, the precise measurements of the main chamber's vault might encode the method for cold welding stone, while the sequence of the 5 ellipsoidal resonance chambers could encode the full 18.6-year lunar cycle. The building wasn't just a home. It was the encyclopedia, ELEM. The maintenance of knowledge, this system required constant, rigorous maintenance. The pattern keepers would have spent their lives in an endless cycle of practice. Ritualistic recitation and peer review. Acoustic recitation, using the resonance chambers. They would practice the complex tonal sequences that represented different data packets. The geometric precision of the chambers acted as a perfect check. If the tone sequence was off, the sound would not focus correctly at the receiving point. The stone itself provided the proof of correctness, kinesthetic encoding, the repeated physical acts of walking specific paths, touching certain stones, and generating the necessary sound or light signal, perhaps by holding a reflector up to the sunbeam, physically and neurologically solidified the knowledge, the code of the perfect zero. Evidence suggests that the Elam valued error correction above all else. Any deviation from the established geometric or acoustic pattern was a threat to the civilization's integrity. Their society was built on the premise that the stone does not lie, and therefore, the knowledge encoded within it must be perfectly recited. The pattern keepers were the opposite of scribes. They were living memory vaults, their minds the only true repository of the Elam paradox advanced. Knowledge kept secure and hidden behind a wall of silence and complexity. They were the ultimate low-energy, low-profile information storage system, perfectly suited to survive deep time and the chaos of the surface world. The weight of this unwritten, the Elam's silent science presents a profound, calming intellectual challenge. It asks us to look past our modern reliance on written text and digital storage, and to appreciate a system of knowledge transfer that was entirely integrated with the physical world. Their astronomy was a light beam, their communication a controlled echo, and their library a labyrinth of carefully carved stone. There's a deep peace in this concept, the idea that knowledge, once freed from the fragility of paper and the fleeting nature of speech, could be made as permanent as the bedrock itself. The Elam created a civilization that was structurally, scientifically, and socially engineered for endurance, not expansion. As the abstract concepts of ancient astronomy and silent, stone-based acoustics slowly rotate in your mind. Let the weight of this unique achievement settle over you. The Elam paradox is not a loud question. It is a long, quiet hum resonating through 40 millennia of stone. Let the stability of their silent knowledge provide the anchor for your rest. Settle further into the silence. We have established the facts. The Elam existed, building an impossible cradle of cold-welded, geologically stable architecture. And they possessed a silent science based on precise astronomy and advanced acoustics, all maintained by the rigorous memory of the pattern keepers. The historical certainty of their presence, however, is met by the absolute, crushing uncertainty of their absence. Tonight, we delve into the core mystery of the Elam, the enigmatic disappearance. This is the moment where the meticulous data ends and the terrifying realistic speculation begins. The Elam did not collapse into ruin. They simply ceased to be there. Their site, G47 Alpha, stands preserved in its pristine state, a perfect, locked box. The question is not what destroyed them, but rather, where did they go? We will systematically examine the three primary hypotheses for their vanishing climate catastrophe: conflict and assimilation, and the most compelling, though hardest to prove, the calculated departure. Hypothesis 1. The fury of the glaciers climate catastrophe. The most common explanation for the decline of Paleolithic cultures is the immense, relentless pressure of the Earth's climate. The Elam flourished during a period defined by the waxing and waning of vast ice sheets, the last glacial period. The environmental stressors. The Elam's estimated peak usage, around $40,000 to $38,000 BP, coincided with a significant period of climatic oscillation known as the Dansgaard-Oeschger events, rapid, dramatic shifts in temperature occurring over mere decades, permafrost and tectonic stability. While the subterranean complex was engineered for stability, even the Elam could not fully insulate themselves from continental-scale shifts. Extreme deep-seated permafrost growth, or localized glacial pressure, could induce microfracturing in the bedrock surrounding their cold-welded seams. Though the main structure shows no catastrophic failure, sustained geothermal strain could have compromised their critical deep air intake shafts, disrupting their finely tuned passive climate control system. The data point. Dr. Vance's team noted localized stress whitening, a minute alteration in the crystalline structure of the rock at the entrances of 4 ventilation shafts, suggesting extreme external pressure was once applied. The loss of surface resources. The Elam, though subterranean, were not independent of the surface biosphere. They required food, water, and specialized raw materials like the ultra-hard mineral powders needed for their tools and cold welding process. As the tundra and steppe environments shifted dramatically due to the advancing glaciers, migratory game routes, their likely primary food source, would have become unpredictable or disappeared entirely. The data point. Pollen analysis from the lowest layers of the main chambers. Dust reveal a shift from cold-tolerant grasses to barren lichen species, indicating a severe local ecosystem collapse during the final centuries of occupation. The paradox of preparation, however. The climate catastrophe hypothesis falls short when confronted with the intentionality of the Elam structure. Their architecture speaks of profound, long-term environmental planning. They built under the ice, anticipating the instability of the surface. If a flood, earthquake, or deep freeze had forced their sudden collapse, we would expect to find skeletal remains, evidence of people trapped by cave-ins or sudden structural failure, tools and artifacts, belongings left behind in a desperate, last-minute flight, signs of resource starvation, heaps of discarded, non-nutritious animal bones, or evidence of cannibalism. Common in starving groups. None of this was found. The complex was internally pristine, professionally swept clean. The Elam survival strategy was built on resilience. A simple climate shift should have been weathered, not resulted in complete, silent extinction. The lack of organic remains makes a sudden, catastrophic collapse highly improbable. Hypothesis 2. Shadows from the surface. Conflict and assimilation. The second major theory is that the Elam were eventually overwhelmed by other, more numerous, and perhaps more aggressive, contemporary human groups. This era was marked by the expansion of Homo sapiens across Europe and the ultimate decline of the Neanderthals. The Elam, with their unique technological niche, may have been caught in this wave of human migration. The problem of coexistence. Elam complex is geologically positioned near known sites of the Aurignacian culture, and potentially within the hunting grounds of late-stage Neanderthal groups. Neanderthal interaction. Given the long coexistence of Neanderthals and early Homo sapiens, It is plausible the Elam, with their advanced knowledge of stone manipulation and resource management, could have been viewed as competition or as a valuable, resource-rich target by the Neanderthals. A protracted siege or a violent breakthrough into the subterranean complex would have been difficult, but not impossible. The data point: a single, fragmented Neanderthal-style Mousterian point was discovered wedged into the bedrock near a sealed outer shaft entrance. This is the only evidence of any external interaction. Is it a sign of a failed attack or merely a discarded hunting tool? The silence gives no answer. Homo sapiens overrun, more likely. The expansion of early Homo sapiens, Cro-Magnon groups, who were generally more numerous and adaptable than Neanderthals, could have exerted intense pressure on the Elam's shrinking surface resources. A conflict on the surface could have cut off the Elam from their food supply, forcing a slow starvation within their secure structure. The absence of violence. The fatal flaw in the conflict hypothesis is the total absence of forensic evidence. No structural damage. There is no fire damage, no forced breaches, and no structural cracks consistent with siege tactics. The cold-welded architecture held firm. No buried dead. In ancient sieges, the dead are often left where they fall or quickly buried near the battle site. There are no mass graves, no signs of hurried disposal, and no skeletal trauma within or immediately outside the complex. No looting. If the Elam were overwhelmed, their unique tools, specialized stones, and resources would have been looted. Yet, the complex was found with its inventory of non-perishable stone tools, hammers, specialized abrasives, measuring devices, intact and organized in storage niches. The tools were not abandoned. They were stored. The Elam did not perish in a desperate fight. Their disappearance does not reflect the chaos of war, but the order of intention. Hypothesis 3. The ultimate project, calculated departure. This brings us to the most complex and historically unnerving theory. The Elam undertook a calculated departure. This hypothesis aligns perfectly with every piece of data, the engineering, the science, and the pristine condition of the site. The Elam were a culture dedicated to permanence and planning. Their entire architectural philosophy was based on long-term survival and stability. Why would a people who invested tens of thousands of man-hours into creating an everlasting sanctuary simply abandon it? The sealing protocol, the most compelling evidence for a calculated, orderly exit, is the state of the access points. All 3 known entrance shafts were meticulously sealed from the inside. The geologic plug. The Elam did not just pile rocks. They constructed complex plugs composed of interlocking, heavy stone blocks held in place by their unique cold welding technique. Crucially, the final block in the sequence was always cold welded to the outer frame, creating an impenetrable, geologically stable seal. The reverse engineering to seal the shafts from the inside required a deliberate, sequential process. The last people out would have sealed the penultimate section, leaving only a small crawl space, and then sealed the final section using specialized tools and an accelerant agent to achieve the final cold weld bond, a process requiring high skill and absolute calm. The data point. Trace residues of the resin binder used in the main floor composite were found lining the last 2 feet of the final sealed entrance shaft, indicating its use as a temporary lubricant to ease the final block into place before the welding process set in. The Elam literally locked the door and took the key with them. They did not flee. They activated the lockdown protocol. The implication of the pattern keepers. Role of the pattern keepers lends immense weight to this theory. Their primary function was the preservation of knowledge. If a situation arose, whether environmental or external, that threatened the structural integrity of the living library, the complex, the pattern keepers would have initiated an emergency protocol. Save the knowledge. Abandon the structure. The knowledge was not in scrolls, but in their minds. The Elam could physically carry their entire scientific and historical library with them. The meticulous storage of the non-perishable stone tools suggests they were cataloging the inventory, possibly for a subsequent return, or merely to leave the site in the state of perfect zero, clean, orderly, and preserved for future archaeological or elem inspection. Why leave Utopia? The unknown trigger, the final terrifying question of the calculated departure, is what could compel an entire society to abandon their perfect, climate-controlled, technologically advanced home? A deep predictive calculation, perhaps. The Elems' advanced astronomy and their understanding of deep time. Geological cycles revealed a coming catastrophe, a tectonic shift, an impending volcanic event, or a climate change event, like the onset of a new glacial maximum, that was beyond the scope of their already formidable engineering. They calculated the inevitable and left ahead of the curve. The subterranean, migration. The Elem were masters of the underground. Is it possible that the calculated departure was not a flight to the surface, but a deeper migration? If their science indicated the surface world was becoming permanently uninhabitable, or too dangerous from human conflict, they may have simply extended their tunnels into deeper, more stable, and more isolated regions of the Earth's crust, beginning an existence that is entirely unseen and undiscoverable by surface dwellers. This is the subterranean continuity theory, suggesting the Elem are not extinct, but simply moved lower. The Elem did not leave behind a story of tragedy, but one of imperturbable competence. They finished their work, they cleaned their house, they sealed the doors, and they marched into the unknown, their science and history stored safely within the memories of their pattern keepers. Their disappearance is not a failure. It is the ultimate expression of their success, a people so advanced they could choose the time and manner of their own vanishing. The enigmatic disappearance is a story not of loud historical events, but of quiet, analytical precision. The sealed stone, the organized tools, and the lack of human remains all point to a deliberate, planned action. The Elem did not succumb to history. They transcended it. Let the quiet weight of this cold, deliberate decision, a calculated exit from time itself, soothe your restless mind. We arrive now at the final, most contemporary, and perhaps most reflective segment of the Elem paradox. We have traversed the impossible cradle, navigated the silent science, and grappled with the calculated departure. The physical presence of the Elem ended abruptly, not with a bang but with a perfectly sealed door $40,000 years ago. Yet, as we turn from deep history to modern anthropological investigation, we find that the Elem did not disappear without a trace. Their silence, their rigor, and their unique unwritten code resonate softly in the customs, the tools, and the architectural principles of subsequent, much younger, human groups. This final exploration focuses on the subtle, often overlooked impact of a civilization that built for permanence. It is a slow, methodical examination of cultural diffusion and the enduring legacy of advanced technical knowledge, even when transmitted purely through oral tradition and behavioral patterns. Let the quiet accumulation of these echoes guide your thoughts toward rest. Footprint of subtlety. Post-Elem cultural residue following the closure of the G47 Alpha complex. The Carpathian region did not immediately revert to an anthropological blank slate. Over the subsequent $10,000 to $20,000 years, the area was settled by various groups of Homo sapiens groups we categorize broadly as Upper Paleolithic and Mesolithic cultures. These groups were technologically defined by bone tools, tailored clothing, and elaborate cave art. They were, in short, what the Elem were not: highly mobile surface-dwelling and culturally expressive. However, modern archaeological work in the region has uncovered several anomalous cultural elements within these younger surface communities that seem to defy local evolutionary explanation, and instead whisper of the Elems. Influence. Point 1. Architectural deviations. The subterranean niche. The typical dwelling of the Upper Paleolithic was either a temporary tent structure or a simple cave shelter. But in 3 distinct sites, chronologically separated by several millennia, archaeologists found evidence of highly specialized, partially subterranean dwellings, the V-shaft pits, at the site designated MH12, $25,000 BP. A small community of hunters built shallow, earth-mound shelters. Uniquely, their structures incorporated a deep, narrow, V-shaped ventilation shaft that extended down into the ground and up through the mound's roof. This design is highly inefficient for simple ventilation, but is extremely efficient at maintaining a constant, stabilized air temperature. By drawing on the geothermal mass, the exact principle used in the Elims complex. The legacy. The surface dwellers were not building cold-welded citadels, but they retained the specific knowledge of how to use the Earth's thermal gradient for passive climate control. This sophisticated, energy-efficient technique was not universally adopted, suggesting it was transmitted knowledge, not spontaneous invention. Stone buttressing. At R88, $15,000 BP. A community began using massive, roughly cut stone blocks to buttress the walls of their earth shelters.